Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. Craft beer and cider, both wins for the agritourism industry. And it's actually less about the alcohol and more about the sense of community and connection that it brings. Dr. Alison Feeney is a professor in the Geography and Earth Science Department at Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania. She blends work with pleasure as she travels around her state of Pennsylvania and beyond to research craft breweries, apple cider mills, and other spirit destinations. Allison has been asked to research so many interesting topics around craft beer trails and the growth of experiential tourism. These types of tourism experiences have different names. We hear terms like gastronomic tourism, food tourism, agritourism, wine tourism, and beer tourism. We find ourselves traveling to farms, vineyards, breweries, cider mills, trade shows, and farmers markets to savor the foods and beverages and immerse in local traditions, cultures, and communities. During this podcast, Dr. Alison Feeney and I explore many of her craft beer and cider research projects and their findings. She has recommended destinations that are definitely worth a visit and craft beer favorites that you need to experience. This is Jen Ross, your AgriTourist podcast host. Enjoy my intriguing conversation with Professor Alison Feeney while she takes us on a craft beer and cider journey. Okay, so Dr. Alison Feeney, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Honored to be on this. Thank you.
So I'm excited. Okay, we have to explore a lot about beer today. First, before we get into all that, tell me a little bit about your past and your history and what kind of brought you here. Obviously, I know you're a professor right now, but kind of take me a little bit back so that we can kind of see the evolution of how you came to this.
Sure. Well, yes, I am a professor. I am a professor of geography and earth science at Shippensburg University, and my specialty is mapping. And so I do a lot with GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems and things like that. And it was, maybe about 2010, 2012, when the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation came to me. And it is illegal to drink in a state park. I always say that's one of the most violated laws that we probably have in Pennsylvania. But they asked me if I would consider mapping where all the craft breweries were, because they wanted to pair up, because they found people who tend to donate for environmental causes like craft beer. And so at that point, I was like, heck yeah, that sounds like a great project.
I was going to say, what was your reaction at first? Were you
me,
surprised or you excited? Or
Yeah, no, even going back way, way farther, when I was quite young, I'd lived in England in like the 70s, late 70s, couple times, and pubs there are just fabulous. Like, it's the place of community where people hang out and they gather, and families and kids, and, drinking there isn't necessarily like a bad, frowned upon thing where people just go and get drunk, right? It's much more that social setting where people, that's how they finish the day, that's how they spend their Sundays with the family. And the fact that beer is involved is just a side part of that, right? And so I always loved that aspect. And that was something that always kind of stuck with me. When I did my grad school out in Portland, Oregon in the late 80s and early 90s, and that's where craft breweries and wineries were kind of taking off. And at that point, my advisor actually said, why don't you look at the maps that are used for sort of tourism aspects of the wine industry? And again, I was like, sure, sign me up. Sounds like a great project. And I will say at that point, it was pretty early on, and the maps were very like a basic kind of Google map, like here's our winery with a little pin mark, you know? So my research didn't produce any major results or anything, but it was an interesting topic. And we would often meet at a brewery to kind of discuss the research. And again, I love that idea that breweries can be this place where people can hang out and talk, and it's more about those social aspects than again the actual drinking part of it. And again, Portland was just such a fun place in that time, and obviously, a lot of breweries came out of that era.
Did anything come out, or for you specifically, did anything come out of that initial research that you did on the wine maps?
Not that one.
Okay.
I have, I did. So yeah, then fast forwarding back to the breweries. So again, I looked at when I first started, we had 169 breweries in Pennsylvania, and now we're five or 600. It really just sort of took off in that next
Wow.
decade. And along the way, I did get back to that idea of how is maps are great marketing tools, and are they really being used efficiently? And especially sort of the late 20 teens to 2020, those brewing and ale trails were really kind of becoming a big tourism. A lot of counties and cities were starting to come up with their own ale trails where people would have like some sort of passport. And I started looking at those, and I did do a research project looking at how maps are used for those ale trails to try to encourage people to go and travel and do those. And I'll say we have a few good maps, but most of them really kind of miss the marketing tool of a map. A lot of them they don't really promote the other things because the people who do tend to like craft brews are going to for the other aspects as well. It might be they want to go on a hike, maybe they want to go pumpkin picking, they want to go cut their own Christmas tree. They want to do those other activities and then enjoy, food and drink at a local brewery. So a lot of those advertisements of the ale trails are kind of missing that other marketing aspect that they could really kind of encourage more tourism to their region, I found.
Really? And is this focused on Pennsylvania? Is like your research focused? Are you from Pennsylvania or
Yeah. So that one is actually, I did the whole country, and I
okay.
looked at like the state websites, and I looked at different like cities within different regions that had very large ale trails. So yeah, like a place like Montana, they had a great map that really kind of focused on the other aspects of Montana as well. And I don't know if this is a direct result, but it's certainly what I think a correlation. The next year or two, the brewery and the tourism went up drastically in that area. I'm trying to think of other cities. That's what I found. Almost every city
Okay.
and every county has an ale trail. So it is something that people like to promote.
So when we're saying these trails and maps, like, are we talking about a physical, visual? Like, I know obviously there's stuff online, but I know sometimes when you come into like an area that's a very touristy area, you sometimes get those very colorful maps that have different places to go. And there's obviously ads around them. I know you commented about that, which can be overwhelming. I love looking at them, but you literally have to study them in order to really figure out, like you have to really like in
Just,
detail look at them and it kind of gets overwhelming sometimes. So where's the balance, I guess, to really pull
yes,
people in?
yeah. So again, prior to 2020, I would say most were actually physical passports, a lot of them were called, and you would get a stamp. If you went into the place, a lot
Okay.
of places would have a sticker or stamp or something that would show. And then when you got them all, you could mail that in back to the tourist place, and they might send you a t-shirt or a hat or some sort of trinket or something. With so much, COVID brought a lot of negative things, but I think a lot of technology changed during COVID too, and a lot more apps are now. So there's a lot more tourist apps that you can download and do it virtually on your phone and
Yep.
just get that sort of electronic stamp. As long as you're in that building, it knows your GPS location and you can collect your place. So yeah, and especially with electronic stuff, you can avoid some of that overwhelming stuff and sort of I think you could even change it seasonally. So in the wintertime, where can you go cut a Christmas tree or go to an indoor museum or something? In the summer, it might be where can I go kayaking? Where could I go hiking? Those it would be very easy to change what the physical things are around that app.
So when you were looking at the United States, did it, besides Montana, which could be the answer to the question, was there any state that stood out to you that, wow, they're doing it really effectively?
Um, well, Lake Tahoe has a really good one too, and they have both a paper map, but they also have an interactive one, and it looks fairly simple and kind of cartoonish at first, but then especially the interactive one, you can click on different things and pan over it, and then it will pop up, some sort of information or things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So,
that's Lake Tahoe, Montana. Any other places
um,
stand out for you that?
trying to think. No, I have not used it, but I hear the Ohio wine one is really good.
Okay.
And that is a digital one where you can stamp. Um,
Okay.
so
Excellent. Excellent. So coming out of that, if someone wanted, there was a state or a county or something that's trying to create something, what would be a few of the key tips to what to think about when, if they're just starting something like this, like what should they think about and focus on when they're trying to create something like this?
I guess really identifying what do people come in for your region for, and how far do you want them traveling? So if it's a, walkable downtown, you may want to highlight even small things like my little town is really cute. They have these amazing hanging baskets on the street every day. Something like that is really nice to identify.
Right.
It may not be a huge tourist draw, but if you're here and you're trying to sample a couple of breweries, notice the plants. Or it
Exactly.
could be, again, if you are in a larger, sort of agricultural area, maybe at some of the farm fields nearby or some of the horse farms or again, whatever your region is kind of known for, I think.
So you wrote, I know you wrote one book at least in 2018, For the Love of Beer, Pennsylvania's Breweries. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that was again one of my fun. So every time I was researching the breweries and I researched everything from, well, what really got me was when I found out where Pennsylvania's all the breweries were, I I started plotting them on the map, and especially in Pennsylvania, we have certainly our big urban centers like Philly and Pittsburgh, but we have a lot of old mining towns, right? Which are
Yep.
really what you'd expect, very sort of decaying. They've been in decay for a while. And yet you find out that like a place like Carbondale has a brewery. And so I was like, I'm on a quest. I got to go visit them. And with 169, it was possible. I got around the state and I got to visit them all. And sure enough, you go to this town like Carbondale, where in the middle of the day, there's an active brewery and there's people sitting in it. Like the rest of the town's kind of deserted, but it's a business where people again are it's flourishing and it's active and it's very much part of the community. And so that was really kind of what kind of kicked it off. And then I started looking at most of them are reusing old buildings. So I was really interested in sort of that telling the story of the local history and the sustainability of using those kind of older buildings rather than the newer, buildings that tend to go on the outskirts of towns. Certain neighborhoods, like Philadelphia is a great one. There's a whole bunch of breweries in places that had been pretty, rough for like one I can think of particularly was in like what was known as the Italian mafia sort of neighborhood. And then it starts to put in a brewery and they're growing hops on the side. They put in artwork and it becomes a very, communal place. And that's what really got me. So I started writing articles, academic articles on the reuse of buildings, the storytelling, the historical sort of significance with even the beer names. They would sort of tie into that local history. And every time I would send, an article off for publication, I'd have a friend kind of proofread it for me. And they're like, oh, this is so cool. You should let somebody else know about it. So I had a collection of these articles that I had kind of put together. And then so I put them into different chapters of the book. And then, so it really is a book that anybody anywhere might enjoy because it talks about the history of beer and some of those aspects of all breweries. But then I did focus in and highlighted some of the specific breweries in Pennsylvania. And there's a little artwork on it, kind of like a passport, where it kind of looks like a beer coaster and you can record when you went and what beer you tried and who you were there with and that kind of stuff. So
Oh, that's cool.
that's how that book came around.
So, for everyone's purpose, what is craft beer?
Good question, because there's craft and crafty.
Okay,
So
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, not all craft beer is equal. And that actually got to another project of mine was as I would go around and sample the beer, some beer is definitely better than others. And there's really no place for a lot of these brewers to learn brewing. Now it is there is some online and some universities that are starting to tap into it. But at the point, back in the early 19s, or the early teens, there really wasn't any place to learn that. And so I started interviewing them, how they kind of learn their craft and that sort of stuff. And we actually started developing some courses in that. So
Oh, wow.
technically there
Wow.
is
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So technically there is a limit of what's independent versus so if you see like if you go into a brewery and they've got it's like an upside down bottle and it has the word independent on it. It means they have to make under a certain amount and they have to be mostly, I forget the exact percentage of independently owned, so they can't be purchased out, right? Um, but really what differs between some of those larger brands is most of these craft breweries have much smaller equipment. And so they can turn over batches much more frequently. So that's where they can start playing with some of those varieties of different styles. What some people may not realize is styles of beer do conform to certain standards or should conform to certain standards. And those come from very long historical practices. So a lager beer, and well, a Pilsner beer comes from the town of Pilsen in Czech Republic. And a Pilsner beer should follow a very specific color, style, alcoholic weight, all that kind of stuff. And so if you go into a craft brewery and they have a Pilsner, that's what it should taste like. Now they have they have the option to add different things. So you may find a Pilsner that is on nitro. So rather than carbonated with CO2, it's getting carbonated with nitro, which doesn't dissolve, so it kind of has a creamy flavor. They can do all sorts of variety of different things. And that is how we've gotten some new styles, like the hazy IPAs that have really been popular the last sort of 5-10 years. That came from a variation of, the IPA was a standard style of beer. Actually, it was originally an English style of beer, Americanized like we do everything, we have to hop it up, strengthen it up, do everything megabits, right? So we have this very bitter, hoppy IPA. And then as people started recognizing that maybe it is a little strong for the general public and started making it a bit hazier and juicier, as well as the demographics of who was drinking started to change, and that hazy IPA became so popular. Now it's probably one of the most common ones when you go into a lot of breweries. You see a hazy IPA, and that becomes an official beer style, I think, in 2019.
When you use the word craft, well, craft and crafted, is that what
I said crafty.
oh,
Yeah,
crafty.
because
Okay.
I try to
Okay.
support a lot of small businesses, but there are some where it's like
It's
they
really
could
small
maybe work on
hobby.
their craft a little. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
excellent. That's funny. So
so
you helped develop some courses around this at your university or
yes, yeah. We actually got a state from Pennsylvania, the Malt and Beer Brewing Association. They have some grants that go out, and yes, we developed a course where we paired up with a local brewer, and we developed some courses in terms of, well, we have one that we teach fairly regularly called Focus on Flavor. And again, that idea of what should each beer style taste like, and how not only, so we would have them where they actually sampled beer, but then the brewer would be like, this is what you need to accommodate for when you're talking about it. We did another one on water chemistry, because the water that you start with was one of the, 90% of your beer is water. And so every local place will have different chemicals in their water. And it's going to taste great for some beer styles, but not the other. And so you need to sort of work with that. You need to test, you got to know what you're starting with, and then sort of alter your beer recipe based upon it.
I didn't even think of that. That's so
Yeah, a lot of
important.
people don't.
Yeah,
But
no,
yes,
that's
it
such
is.
a key ingredient that is
Yeah.
varies, like you said, so much from location to location.
Yeah.
Wow.
And actually, we did a just a small homebrew batch of 5 gallons, but we did it for this class where we did like distilled water, the water from the local area, and then also water that we added some minerals and salts to. And being able to taste. So we did exactly the same beer, the same equipment, back to back brewing, but with just slight variations in that water. And it's incredible what happens to your beer. Not only the flavor, but like the mouth feel, so like the thickness, and then the head that it produces. The foam is pretty amazing just by your basic water.
Wow. Okay. And what about source like other like are a lot of these breweries sourcing locally their
A lot of
ingredients?
them, a lot of them would like to, but yeah, and one other course we did was on growing hops, where we had a local hop farmer, a local brewer, and faculty member kind of teaching and looking at that. Hops in the New England Mid-Atlantic region is pretty hard to grow. They used to be wild, so when early settlers first came, they were actually encouraged to bring hop plants with them because everybody brewed their own beer, and they used to grow wild and lucrative. And but about the same time as prohibition, there is a fungus that moved into the area and has really sort of contaminated the soil. It's a downy mildew fungus, and at that point hop production moved out to the Pacific Northwest, mostly in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and in the drier valleys where they get plenty of sunshine, but it is drier and you don't get that. uh, and then it once sort of prohibition ended, by that time they didn't really, it takes several years to get production back into, get your hop plants back into full swing. And so very few farmers really kind of did that, and that fungus still exists. So it is challenging. We do have several, and they're a great group of people. They're very hardworking trying to get these local hops going, and but the quantity that they make is relatively small. It will, 3 to 4 acre hop farm is, you know pretty good in the East Coast. And that's going to produce enough for if you ever see a wet beer, it'll usually be on tap in like August, September. And what that means is that brewery got their hops fresh and they went directly. You really have to take it right from the field and brew with it that day.
Oh,
And
wow.
so they
Okay.
literally, a lot of the brewers will actually go out right to the hop field, bring it right back to the brewery and brew with the hops. And then, yeah, it will. So, yeah, if you see the term wet beer, obviously all beer is wet, but that's what it means. It's referring to a beer that's made with, they're also, the hops are flour, but what the hop is that you have in beers, if you ever open a hops, there's little yellow oils called lupulin glands, and that's the stuff that is used in beer. When they do it, and they get processed out in the Pacific Northwest, where they get that oil out and then they process it into little dry tablets that kind of look like rabbit food, like little pellets. And that's what most brewers will use. When you do the whole hops, you use the whole flour and it gets a little bit messier, and just one more thing you got to kind of clean out of your equipment. So it is a unique kind of taste because it does have that strong sort of hoppy, skunky kind of taste to it, but it is kind of unique. So if you get a chance, if you see a wet beer, you know you're supporting a local farmer, and so try it out and drink it.
That's a great tip. Quick question on sourcing. Do many of the U.S. breweries source somewhere from the U.S. or are they bringing in from another country? Are there any other countries that are big suppliers for us?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and certainly barley is another major ingredient too. Barley is a bit easier to grow locally on the East Coast, but yeah, most of the hops are grown on the West Coast. Washington is one of the world's leading suppliers. So yeah, most of the breweries will use that. However, there's sort of four main hop regions in the world, and hops are just like a local food. I mean, if you grow your own tomatoes, you may have a great year one year and they taste great, whereas like the next year they may not. And hops is the same thing. And so the Great Britain, Herefordshire, the western part of England, originally is a major hop growing region, and they have what they call noble hops, and they have sort of a very earthy tone to it. The Bavaria region and into Czechia, the Czech Republic, is another area where they have the SARS hop, and that again is great for like lagers and pilsners. And then there's actually a really unique place in Germany, which Bamberg, which does smoked beer, and they'll smoke some of their beer as well. And so Bamberg has barley and some unique flavors there. The west coast of the United States has more of that citrusy pine, and that's where a lot of the ones for the IPAs grow. The newest region is down in New Zealand, and
Oh,
that is those citrusy kind of hops that really do taste like you're eating a papaya or an orange, or it's incredible. And that's where those juicy IPAs often will come from.
very cool.
So,
Great. Thank you. That was a good description. So let me just go back to the Pennsylvania breweries. Any favorites or surprises that stood out for you when you were doing that analysis?
yes,
That must have been a lot
absolutely.
of fun, by the way.
It was very fun. And I will tell you, one of the great things about going into visiting a brewery is, especially craft brewery, often the craft brewer is there and they're working. They may be back, but they'll start early. By midday to end of day, they're finishing, and they will often be out like talking with customers. And so you really you can easily ask and learn. So it's a nice experience. And I will tell you, of all the like the passionate stories I heard from these people trying to get their business up and going, how they renovated, how things they used. These brewers are, it's like their babies. And so they really are very, very passionate about it. And I love that. So yeah, I have a bunch that I go to, well, and then I have some that I say, oh, these are my favorite that are just a little too far to get to, that's on a regular basis. But some really, well, certainly in Pennsylvania, there's some really big ones that if anybody is ever in the state, they should go to. Yingling is one of the, and everybody's always like, that's not a craft brewery. It is, and by definition, yeah, Sam Adams and um Yingling are some of the largest craft breweries, independent breweries that we have. But Yingling is the oldest one, and they have a great tour. And you go through and you can see they were one of the few that survived Prohibition. And so you can go through and see that. One of my favorite is Trogs. It's located right near the Hershey, uh, Pennsylvania, sort of that park. And they have just an amazing tap room and variety. They also have one of the best tourism tours. They have several options. The Yingling one, I believe, still is free, but you do have to sign up in advance. But they do several of them a day. Uh, Trogs does several different depending on what level. There's a self-guided one. So if you just happen to be in the area and stop by, they have a self-guided one, they have a guided one. They do have some in-depth ones where you really, you get more and you get different samples and stuff like that. So those two I really highly recommend people kind of visiting. In terms of the uh, well, yeah, so some are kind of like different styles. Uh, One near me that I particularly love is Gear House in Chambersburg. That brewer started in the wine industry. He then also worked at Trogs before opening their own. And he's one that helps teach our courses. He's just extremely knowledgeable, very, very good at explaining things to people. Um, Levity out in the western part of the state is one that I always say is just a little too far for me, but I absolutely love it.
Well,
Um,
Pennsylvania is a big state, so.
it is, yeah. And some have really just unique architecture that um like there's Church Brew Works in Pittsburgh that is in a historic, nationally historic Catholic church. And
Wow.
so it's one of those places that's sort of hard to miss if you're in the area to stop by just for the architecture, and the experience alone. Um, and yeah, there's a new one that I like down in Waynesboro. They design beers that when I'm like, that's not beer, and it sounds absolutely disgusting. And then I go there and I'm like, oh my God, that's so good. So like they had one, it was a bright blue, they called it Cookie Monster, and it was fabulous. But yes, it tied your looked like you'd been eating some sort of weird candy because it was bright blue. And yeah, they're a great couple that opened that, and they have a brewer from Stone Brewery out in California. And so yeah, really talented brewers, but things that if you looked at it, you wouldn't think that's beer. So.
So after you published that book, what other projects were you involved in regard to this industry?
Well, so I did actually, I did a study for the state on cider, hard cider.
Oh, you
Um,
did? Okay, that's
yeah,
interesting.
so that was for the Center for Rural PA, and they were interested on how hard cider could possibly impact agrotourism. And I kind of looked at Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, sort of some of the surrounding states. And the reason is Pennsylvania is the fourth largest apple producing state, and most of it comes from sort of around the Gettysburg area. And yet at the time we were 17th in production for cider. And so that to me was very interesting where the disparity was between cider production and that.
Talk to
The interesting,
me. Yeah, talk to me about
yeah.
that though.
So cider is an interesting one because, well, all alcohol gets taxed. And at the national level, we have beer, wine, and spirits. Cider doesn't fall into those. And then it also allows each state that, um, when prohibition was repealed, it allowed each state to mandate their own alcohol. And so then at the state level, it's taxed again, and they also have beer, wine, and spirits. So each state will sort of handle it slightly different. And at the national level in Pennsylvania, sorry, at the national level, cider is a wine, considered a wine. And then at the state level, it was considered a brewed beer, brewed beverage.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And but then there's all sorts of legal issues, like you can't brew one day and also produce cider. And so most of our cider is done with a limited wine in the state, and they can produce a certain amount. And then it also usually is capped. Different states will have different percentages, but usually somewhere between 6 and 7% alcohol, for eight. I think Virginia's 8%, in terms of what that can be there. So yeah, so that was kind of interesting looking at the different those states. Like New York has a small farm uh license. So like the actual farmers could, if they have extra, vegetables and things, they can brew with those. And apples is one where, if you buy them in the store, you want the perfect shiny apple. You don't want one with holes in it that look like you have worms running through it. Or so if you get an early hailstorm, and they all have little dents in it, then the farmers kind of lost a good chunk of their crop for eating apples. Whereas if you could make cider out of them, they've been able to do something.
So with that research, how did you see Pennsylvania use that research, and has there been a change in that industry?
I don't think they have changed any laws. I did have several of like legal people and reach out and be like, "Oh, that's really interesting," but I don't think they have actually implemented that. So,
do you see an increase in cider production?
not really. So that was taking off sort of that 2015 to 2020. Cider was really taking off. Especially as some people started to be a bit more health conscious, and they were kind of starting to drink cider. What starts happening around 2020 is there's changes in what those like ready-made drinks. So those really start taking off, and kind of those are some of the fastest growing selling things in the alcohol industry right now.
Okay.
So it kind of kind of leveled out this actual cider, but those ready-made drinks sort of took the place.
It's interesting. I mean, I think about Long Island. We have one big, I mean, there's probably some others, but there's this one big cider mill out east, and it does extremely well. I mean, they have a diversity of ciders, like more taste than I've ever experienced. And then when I went up to the Finger Lakes recently, there's a huge vineyard, well, many vineyards up there, but there was a vineyard, and they had this whole section that was all cider, and a whole bar just for cider. It was delicious, actually.
Yeah.
But like you said, I think it has leveled off a bit from what I can see.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went and studied at the World Cider Academy, which is in Herefordshire, England, and it's amazing. You learn in this church that has been there for thousands of years, and they have an apple orchard where they grow all these different styles of apples. And they also make perry there, which is similar to apple but made out of pear. And so I really learned like the good traditional styles of cider. And then you come back to the US, and again we got to do everything like so one of my neighbors owns a winery, but their cider production is going absolutely, he can't keep enough in stock. And
really,
he tells me these different styles that they have, but I'm like, that's not cider. Like again, like these
that's interesting though.
different flavors. Yeah. So
Have you seen anyone in the US doing it similarly to what you learned?
Yes. So in Adams County, so it's just a little west of Gettysburg, is an incredible, it's called Big Hill Cider. And when I was in Europe, again, the owner of this cider academy, they're like, they couldn't remember. He's like, you have something that would beat any European cider. And he went on and on about how great Big Hill cider was. Like, so yes, they are, but they also did it the right way. They grew, um, they went in and they bought a farm and they put in a variety of different apples. So what a lot of people don't realize is what you were taught like in third grade about Johnny Appleseed, right? Where he went skipping across the country, throwing seeds of apples for early settlers to have apple trees. Well, those apple trees weren't for eating apples. They brewed hard cider with them because while an apple is great, kind of rots pretty easily. And especially if you are out in, the hinterland, you need to survive. And so the winters they could brew cider and that would provide a good caloric intake for them. Cider from the drink tastes better if it's brewed with more tart apples, not the kind that you actually eat. Like we have, if you go to the grocery store and get Honeycrisp or something, that's a really sweet eating apple. That's not the best for making cider. So it's the thing. The other thing too, apples that are grown from just seed. So again, Johnny Appleseed throwing his little seeds everywhere, tend to make sort of that more tart kind of apple, rather than a well-crafted apple tree where you have like your gallows and things like that. So from a natural seed, you do get those varieties that give you those tart apples. And so, yeah, so a lot of our early settlers were drinking cider, especially after we finally gained independence from, beer was considered a British drink. And so they often, as the US became independent, cider sort of took off as a major settlers kind of drink there. I was going somewhere else with that.
Well, I have a question. You want to finish your thought? I don't want to interrupt
No,
the
go
thought.
right ahead.
So you mentioned before we think apple cider, it's healthy. Is it though? I mean, like, is it healthier than wine or beer? Because if if we think about it, wine is from grapes and, beer has hops and, some other ingredients. Like, so is it healthier or is that just our perception?
Well, so, I mean, new research shows there's no alcohol that's really healthy, right?
I mean, that's
so your
that's
body
what I'm
can't
saying. Like, I feel
process
like
it.
there's
So,
like, oh, we think it's apples,
right.
and like,
Yeah. So let's put that out there first of all. It's not a health drink, like, but with that being said, a lot of the Germans do drink it as to replenish after sports. So there are some benefits to each of those beverages, right? And the one with cider is because there's no grains, there isn't that for people who might have celiac disease
right?
or
Okay.
don't want those extra, grains, that kind of stuff, cider. And traditional cider should be made with just the apples. You shouldn't be adding in extra sweeteners to it, anything like that. In the US, at least in Pennsylvania, I'm not sure if this is per state or whole federal, it has to be made with at least 51% apple juice or apple concentrate to be called cider. And so, but that leaves 49%, right? So some
That's
of
a
those
lot.
places so some of those places we were talking about that like make those wild varieties, chances are they're also putting in other juices or sweeteners that are coming. And then again, you're kind of losing that sort of advantage.
Authenticity. Yes.
Right, exactly. And those health benefits. So,
Okay.
but certainly, like wine does have some resveratrol, right? So that's why, they say red wine's good for your heart. Hops do have some benefits. There's it's antimicrobial, so that's why they're used to preserve the beer, but that does have effects, some anti cancer causing. It is related to the cannabis family, so there is some medicinal sort of like relaxing Henry VIII used to sleep with a pillow of hops to try to get him to go to sleep. And then apples are apple juice, there's so some benefits there. So, but yeah, with the caveat that, you are drinking apple. So, but
Oh,
I will say, in terms of others, because this is one thing that I go to brewing conferences and you have all these brewers there, and I would say 99% of them are low to average body weight. Like these are fit individuals. Now again, they're moving all day. Brewing beer is a very physical job, and but they are not overweight. So the idea of somebody like getting a beer belly, those are the people who are probably chugging the cheap beer, and eating potato chips and sitting on their couch the whole time. So I do find that part is pretty interesting that and these brewers are tasting their beer every single day. So
yeah.
and
Yeah.
yet they're keeping a sort of a basic healthy body weight.
That's good to know. So, so you mentioned before different trends. So we have, we have the craft breweries, we have the vineyards and all the different wines. We have the apple cider. So what's happening now? Like what's the shift? What are people thinking about? What are the new trends for going forward that you think are taking place?
Yeah. Well, definitely younger people are not drinking as much. And that is decreasing. Certainly the younger generation and even that older generation, there is a decrease in alcohol consumption. And I think it's just because, yeah, the science does show, it's really not good for you. So, whether you choose to never drink it or use it a bit, less frequently, knowing that I think is important. Um, the and that's not just a trend here in the US. I was over in the Munich and Bavaria region last year, and it was in Germany, Austria, and Czechia, and all three of them, they recognize their youth are not drinking beer nearly as much. So that's definitely a trend all over the place. In terms of the type of alcohol, again, I think those ready-made drinks are really kind of becoming certainly around those about the time that uh, cider was starting to take off and kind of level off. That's when like White Claw and those seltzers started to come
Seltzers. Yep.
around. Yeah. And then I think that sort of tapered off. And now again, those ready-made drinks and the technicality of those, some of them are made with malt beverages, so they can be sold at like a gas station or somewhere else. And so you can get something that tastes just like a margarita, but it's actually made out of barley, and so yeah, they can sell it there, not where, in Pennsylvania, you have to go to a state liquor store to actually get the spirits. So so that's kind of changed, and just the ease and accessibility of those. Again, if you're going off on a summer picnic, yeah, you don't have to start mixing up drinks. You can take a, margarita in a can and that kind of thing.
Yep.
That switch from bottles to cans happened pretty quickly. That was probably a bit earlier, but certainly kind of around that 2010, 2015 time. Up until then, everybody thought a beer had to be in a bottle. And then once they realized that no, actually, glass bottles have a lot of degradation to them and your beer is going to taste different. And then the environmental costs of moving glass, once people started recognizing how important cans were, that's shifted pretty quickly too.
And how are cans though on our environment? I mean, is
So
it better? Is it much better than glass?
yeah, well, yes. So one, especially beers that are hoppy, so like the IPAs, all those sorts of things that came out, hops deteriorate very quickly, really quickly. It can happen in minutes if you have sunlight.
Wow.
So those glass bottles really can change the taste of them. Yes, glass is harder to recycle. A lot of places won't even recycle it anymore, harder to clean, so much more heavier. you have to have them in heavier cardboard to protect them in the move too, whereas a can is much lighter. And so, yeah, so the packaging, distribution, and recycling of cans is a lot better.
Okay.
Chilling it too, yeah, so all aspects of that.
Now, so you're a professor and you do a lot of research. Have you been tempted, like obviously you're around all these entrepreneurial people who are doing some amazing things and you know so much, especially going overseas and meeting and even in the US meeting with all these experts and learning all how to do a lot of these things. Have you been tempted to try something yourself?
No,
I like that
uh,
definitive no.
it's definitive. I will say I am so impressed by these brewers because again, a lot of them start by home brewing in their garage or in their basement, and that is so much different than running a business. And most of them start because they kind of like to tinker with little things. A lot of them have like chemistry degrees, math degrees. They tend to be the kind of, it is a very male, focused
Dominated.
industry.
Yeah.
And so they tend to be these guys, and that's their sort of hobby.
Yeah.
And then they get better at it and decide that, oh yeah, maybe I should. And then the whole customer service, like these are guys that want to be in their basement alone. They don't really have customer service skills. So it is pretty impressive to see them going. And alcohol is one of the most regulated objects that we have in the US. So they have to be up
So many
on
rules. Oh.
yeah, from the sales to the local community, everything. And so I am really impressed by these breweries. And that's why I say I try to support all of them. I just hope some of them keep getting better along the way. But no, and they work so hard. And that's one of the things. So again, I've gone around and sample but a lot of them never get the chance to go out. So I'm like, oh, don't you know this so and so? And they're like, no. So yeah, so I think I got the best job.
I was going to say, yeah, you definitely, I think it's a great job. You definitely got yourself in an amazing position. Right now, are you working on any that you can talk about, any
That's
interesting
it.
projects?
Well, so yeah, I've kind of shifted. I still am in that sort of tourism region, but I've really been looking at short-term rentals like the Airbnb industry. And that's another one. Similar to beer, people have a very strong opinion. Some people really like it, some people hate it. And unfortunately, short-term rentals are the same. People love them or they don't want them next to them. So yeah, it's an interesting aspect there too.
Yeah, did someone come to you to do that research?
So, well, no, I was again sort of that post-COVID time period. I was really interested, sort of just in migration shifts and people's ability to kind of work remotely,
Okay.
and maybe not permanently, but people who maybe like their kids are off school for the summer, so they want to rather than live in the city, go to the Poconos,
Right.
and have a place where their kids can be outside. And so that's to me sort of what piqued my interest. But yeah, the Pennsylvania was interested in sort of the legislation aspect of them to sort of see. So I have been doing a project for the state on some of the regulations. That's actually it's been approved for press. I think it should be coming out any day. It should be
Good.
out there. Looking at sort of the inventory and analysis of sort of the growth of that.
And any other books in the works? Anything you're interested in writing or exploring
uh,
or studying or researching?
Yeah, I do. I love that aspect of tourism. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm actually extending that short-term rental down to look at some of the other states that are sort of off the East Coast, like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Asheville, North Carolina. So,
Okay, so I have a final question for you. So, your all-time favorite craft beer, even if it's not local.
yeah. Oh gosh. I always say an open one. Yeah. I've just there's so I went to Czechia is again the sort of the home of Pilsner beer, which isn't necessarily my favorite style, But being able to go there and go to the Pilsner Urquell and actually sampling it directly from the source is amazing. And I'd even say some of the, like, yeah, so craft beer is great. People don't give enough credit to our mass produced beers too. Uh, they sometimes get a bad rap, but a place like Coors, it's the largest single production facility in the world. And so it is incredible the size and capacity, and they brew everything exactly the same every time. Like the quality control is amazing.
Wow.
And they too have a great tour. If you get to go out
Yeah,
to
we
Golden, Colorado.
yeah, we take it for granted actually that the type of
Exactly, right.
production that needs to exist to actually do that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
every time to taste good. Yeah. I mean, that's what, if you try to think of any aspect of your life where you do exactly the same thing, I mess up like even my coffee, which I'm really particular about in the morning, it's not exactly the same every day. And yeah, you're doing the volume that they're doing every day. And yeah, so, I like to support those local businesses, but we can't overlook some of the big beer
agreed.
companies too. So,
Agreed. And any
yeah.
favorite apple ciders? Probably something you tasted overseas, I presume.
Well, no, I will say Big Hill is definitely my favorite.
Okay.
And that is an incredible, if people are looking for a go-to spot, they have this facility that is in Adams County. So it's about, I'd say 5 miles from Gettysburg, and it's up in the mountains. And
Nice.
it's next to state forest, so you can go hikes right from there. They often have music and playing, and actually just couple miles down from there is another place called Thirsty Farmer, which is a brewery and an apple orchard. If Nouse apples, if they are big in like applesauce and stuff like that, so they have this farm, and again, you can sit and drink either the beer or the cider. They have those duck dog competitions where you pay a certain amount and let your dog try to jump in the tanks and catch things. And
Oh, that's
and
so
then they
funny.
across the street is a historic round barn where they sell fruits and vegetables, and really just an amazing, if people are looking for something other than like dead soldiers around Gettysburg, it kind of makes a nice transition for the day to, get out from, again, those major cities, Baltimore, Washington,
Yep.
area.
Excellent. Well, it's been a
So
pleasure. You've
this is,
definitely, I'm learned so much. I am not a beer
yeah.
drinker myself. I've, tasted, but I'm not a big beer drinker. So I learned a lot from this conversation. So thank you. And thank you for taking the time. I'm excited to see the other research that you do. So definitely keep me posted or, let me know when that Airbnb thing comes out.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I had so much fun talking with you today.
I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. So I was recently listening to one of the Grounded in Maine podcasts produced by Amy Fagan. The podcast is an open conversation about being mindful about how we show up in the world. It's focused on sustainability and how sustainability impacts every part of our life. What are some of the most important takeaways that people will get from your podcast?
One of the things that I hope that people will take away from the podcast is encouragement. Like, I want them to not feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be part of the solution, because, there are a lot of sustainable, things that say sustainability or sustainable, like solar panels or organic cotton and stuff like that. Like, some things are just more expensive because they have that tagline, that phrase or whatever. But there are so many ways that you can be sustainable. You just have to be a little bit creative. And so I'm putting out all these ideas that what people are doing, just to put the thought out there that we can all be part of it without going broke.
So how can people find your podcast?
My podcast is wherever podcasts are found. It is just called Grounded in Maine. I also have my Instagram is where I am most active, and the Instagram handle is Grounded in Maine Podcasts.